Can you just raise your hand if you're a pastor in here? Just want to honor you, honor Joe. Thank you for having me, bro, seriously. If you guys didn't know, the average career span of a pastor is 3 years. It's hard. I don't know if you knew that, but you individuals in this room sometimes are hard to deal with. And so your pastors care for you. And so if you're a pastor in this place, I just honor you for your pouring in and raising up of young people. My name's Derek. I live in Southern California. I drove up here this morning, this afternoon. And I was sitting in the back, I was thinking, I used to come to summer camps. I wasn't a Christian, but I came to them. Parents would make me go, or a friend would drag me there, and I would flirt with girls, probably like some of you are trying to do. And then I would leave, and oftentimes, the first thing I would do was go smoke weed, or I'd get drunk, or I'd take pills in some way, shape, or form. And I was thinking to myself, I've thought about this a lot actually, what did I need to hear at a summer camp like you guys are at in order to change the trajectory of my life? I speak with a kind of an urgency, as if your life really matters. Most of you have never been told that your life matters. It's kind of an assumption that you might have in the background of your head, but your life is exceedingly significant. And you need to hear that. If you don't hear that, you'll waste your life. You'll waste it on video games. You'll waste it on trying to pursue a man or a woman or drugs, or you'll waste it on pursuing fame or fortune or whatever else the world has to offer if you don't believe that your life has weight to it, significance. I heard a preacher once, he preached a gospel message, and an old man responded and came up and sat on the front row, just where you guys are right there. Sat next to the preacher, started crying his eyeballs out, not tears of joy, put his head on the preacher and said the words over and over again, I've wasted it, I've wasted it, I've wasted it. Now, 60 years old to you is a long time from now, but it's coming. And what you do from this moment till then will determine if your life was a waste or not. Your parents probably have a dream for your life. How many of your parents have told you what they might imagine your life could be? Raise your hand. You might have a dream for your life. You might have got it off Instagram. Oh, I'd like to be like Kim Kardashian one day. Oh, I'd like to be like this athlete one day. And you have some sort of vision or dream you planned out. Most people's dreams for their life line up with the American dream. All of you in this place are American. Did you know that you live in the richest and wealthiest society that has ever existed? Some of you think that you're not rich. Guess what? You are. Did you know that 51% of the world lives on $2 a day or less? $2 a day or less. Not only are you some of the richest people on the planet now, you're some of the richest people that have ever existed. Did kings and queens 300 years ago have cars to drive? Did they have air conditioning? It's freaking hot up here, man. I don't know how you guys live in this part of California. It's like we got out of the car today, I almost fainted, I was tired. You got AC. How many of you have a phone? Do you know how many people would be shocked and astonished from 200 years ago that you have a device on your hand that connects you with the globe, and at a press of a button, you can buy some crypto coin that blows up 2 days later, and now you're a millionaire all of a sudden? You live in a society where the dream goes something like this. go to school, graduate, get a job, get married, start to make some money, get a nice house, white picket fence in a nice neighborhood, have 2 cars, 3 kids, long weekends, nice vacations, make as much money as possible so you can retire as early as possible on a beach in Southern California or Florida, start to play golf and collect shells. As the last thing that you do before you stand before the creator of the universe, look, Lord, here's my shell collection. Can you imagine standing before Jesus and all you have to show him, all the significance of your life was founded in a house that 100 years from now probably won't be here, or in a bank account, or in shells, or your shoes. Whatever you think has value and significance, I plead with you tonight, don't waste your life. I wish someone would have told me that at a youth camp, and I'm speaking to 2 people tonight. Some of you in this room, whether you do it right away or you do it a year from now, will be like me. You'll leave and you'll forget everything. I'm speaking to you tonight. I want to be a mosquito in your ear when you leave, buzzing, annoying you, not able to get the words out that I said out of your head so that you would stay in the conviction of what God does in your life tonight and over the next 3 days. And for the second person, some of you are on fire for Jesus Christ right now. And you're gonna leave here and you're gonna live for Jesus in your high school or on your university or wherever you're going back to, and you're gonna be fueled tonight. And you're gonna be filled with more fire so that the representation of Jesus from your life goes far beyond a Bible verse in your Instagram bio or a cross necklace. People are like, oh, that guy's a Christian over there. But you would be a wave, a loud shout to people around you that Jesus is real and he died for you. How many of you are under 20 years old in here? Jesus, one time, walked up to a group of teenagers. Most Bible scholars think that these teenagers were between the ages of 18 and 13, which is many of you in this room. You know these teenagers as the disciples, Peter, Andrew, James, John. He walked up to them while they were working for their dad and says to them the most ridiculous 2 words you could possibly imagine. Follow me. You're working at Taco Bell later in life to make ends meet. Don't worry, it's just in college. You're not gonna work at Taco Bell the rest of your life. You're there, a strange man who claims to be God walks into your Taco Bell, points at you and says, follow me. How many of you going? You're like, it's Taco Bell, I'm leaving, it doesn't matter. Anybody can come in and say, follow me, I'm going. I don't know if you knew that, but Peter, when Jesus pointed him out, he was probably 18 years old. Most people, when they look at high schoolers or they look at youth, they don't take you seriously. And it makes you not take yourself seriously. And so you think, when I'm 22 or when I'm 28, God, other people, myself, I'll start to take myself seriously then. And right now, you just let the time and the years go by, hoping that you can get older. Start right now. Start taking yourself seriously, unlike me. At 18, I found myself on July 4th night in the back of a cop car. I had been caught for breaking and entering, and I had stolen valuables that were in accordance with more than $400 apparently. I didn't know that. And I also didn't know that that was a felony charge. So I was 18, I was getting charged as an adult. 10 years later, because God took me seriously, 10 years later, I'm standing on a stage in front of 30,000 people preaching about how being a Christian must involve courage. How do you go from a back of a cop car to 10 years later being on a stage in front of 30,000 people? Unless God takes you seriously. Most of you are like Jeremiah. Jeremiah, God comes to him in the first chapter. You can go read it. And Jeremiah is called out. You're a prophet to the nations. You're going to speak on my behalf in Jerusalem and to all of your people. And you know what his reply is? I'm young. You know what God says? Don't tell me you're young. I called you since before you were born. Some of you, when you're hearing some of these things, not only are you young, you can't talk yet. Have any of you ever tried to give a public speech and it terrifies you so bad that the idea of standing on a stage would literally make you faint? You go, I can't talk about Jesus, I can't talk to my friends, I can't do that. I don't know how to. Moses said the same exact thing. God comes to him and says, you're gonna go back and you're gonna tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And Moses has the audacity to reply to God and says, I've got a stutter. I love God's reply. Who made your mouth? Who made your mouth? Whatever your excuse is tonight. Some of you in the future, most of you don't really have a ton of money that's your own money right now. But in the future, money's gonna be a thing that's very significant to you. And if God calls you to do something ridiculous, money might be one of your excuses. I don't have it. Jesus has this really funny moment where he walks into the temple and the Pharisees are mad at him because he doesn't pay a temple tax. Imagine walking in here and Joe has like a bucket and you had to pay to get in every time. That's what the temple was like. And so Jesus, not wanting to offend anybody, tells Peter, go catch a fish. So he goes and catches a fish, and guess what he pulls out of the fish's mouth? A coin, and drops it into the bucket. Jesus was a savage. If you are worried or you have an excuse tonight, Jesus wants to absolutely blow it out of the water. So that when you leave this place, Christianity isn't just something you do on Sunday or when you go to youth group or something your parents make you believe. That it's really yours and it's expressed in how you live, in the things you say, and how you interact with people. I'm married. I got married 7 years ago. Imagine if you came up to me and you said, Derek, do you love your wife? And I replied by holding the piece of paper that the state of California gave me to prove that I said yes to a woman on that day. Yeah, here it is. We said yes. We lived together. What would you know about my life and my relationship with my wife if I responded like that? You don't love her. Love, your relationship with Jesus has to be expressed out of your life, your hands, your mouth, your feet. If it stays inside, ladies, how many of you, when that man, the future, plants his feet in the ground and goes, hey, you and me, baby, we're going on a date. And for some reason you say yes. Yet every time the man is around his friends, he ignores you and pretends like you're not dating. What do? Bye. Bye. How often do we do that with Jesus? We're in here, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. We leave, go back to school. Who's Jesus? Sounds like a cool guy. A lot of you in this room don't believe or don't know that Jesus can use you. My wife and I lead all of our ministries events that we do in Europe. I travel to Europe all the time. One of the places we go to is the Czech Republic. You may or may not have heard of it. But there's a girl there who came to one of our events. At the time, she was 15. Her name's Veronica. Just so you know, she has a really imperfect background. She comes from an abusive household. Her dad's a drunk, and her mom gets beat by her dad, and they have a really tense unbearable marriage, so to speak. This girl shows up at one of our events. The message was very similar tonight. Use your mouth to express your love for Jesus in a public setting. And she left our event, and that same night, she started to preach the gospel on the streets of the main capital, Prague. And a few days later, we got a message on our Instagram feed from a guy, and he said, hey, I was an atheist. Some girl from your event came, she preached the gospel to me. I responded to it. I just want to let you know there's some random girl out on the streets preaching the gospel from your events. We're like, oh, that's cool, thanks. It gets better, it gets wilder. Later, we find out, a couple months later, not only was she doing that, but she started to preach the gospel open air on buses and on trains in the city. On top of that, it gets better. At her school, she was bullied. She was one of the only Christians at her school. Czech Republic's one of the most atheistic nations in Europe, secular nations in Europe. And she was one of the only Christians there, and she was getting bullied, not only by the other students, but by her teacher. And her teacher was giving her bad grades specifically because she was a Christian. The teacher emails my wife, because my wife had started to develop a relationship with this girl at this point. My wife gets an email, and the teacher says, hey, I just want you to know these are all the things I've been doing to Veronica and all the things the students have been doing to Veronica, but I gave her an assignment where she had to speak in front of the class and give just basically a speech on whatever she wanted, but it had to be in English. What do you think she did? She preached the gospel. Her teacher comes up to her afterwards. Apologizes, repents, and receives Jesus. Okay, so this girl comes from an abusive house, which we're walking with her out of. And she's 15, like a lot of you. You know how to talk very well. And yet she said yes to Jesus. You have no idea what will happen to you if you truly say yes to the cost of following Jesus. Not raise your hand and pray a prayer in here, but live for him out there. You have no idea. The scripture says in 2 Chronicles 16:9, that the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the whole earth. They're looking for something. When you think of God, what do you think of? Kind of, like when you actually think of his being. Like when you think of heaven and you think of a being sitting on a throne, what do you think of? Some old guy sitting in a chair, grumpy face, bored, angry? Most people do. When they think of God, they think of this far off, bored, slightly angry, watching football on Sundays, not wanting you to bother him in any way, shape, or form. But the Bible paints a different picture. It says his eyes peer over the balcony of heaven and they're in search for something on this planet. His eyes aren't on Yosemite or the Eiffel Tower in Paris or on anything that human beings have ever made. His eyes are looking for. The eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the whole earth to give strong support, to show up for, to do something great through for the one whose heart is totally his. Yes, there's a yes deep in your heart. When you get married in the future and you say yes to your spouse, not only are you saying yes to them, you're also saying no to everyone else. Do you know that? It's not just I love you, you're also saying to everyone else, no, I don't want you. When you say yes to Jesus, you have to say no to some certain things. Can I tell you about a time where I said no to Jesus? Like I said, I lead our events and all the different stuff we do in Europe as a ministry. And I got back from a trip, this was maybe about 5 years ago, and at the time, my wife and I were living in this apartment, Huntington Beach, California, maybe about 5 minutes from the beach. And one of my next door neighbors was this classic Southern California surfer kid. Barely spoke English, more grunted, said bruh, like bruh, kind of like that type of a guy. And I was coming back from this trip, I was walking up to my apartment, and he was walking into his apartment, and he looked at me and he said, hey. He said, hey man. And it was kind of one of those interactions where I was like, please stay away from me. And he was like wanting to engage. It was that kind of eye contact, I have with someone sometimes. So I introduced myself, we talked for a minute, and I went up to my apartment, and 5 minutes later, my door was still open. He busted in and goes, hey man, do you smoke weed? And I go, no. He goes, oh, okay, and he left. Okay. 5 minutes later, he comes back up, same thing, doors open, walks in and goes, hey man, do you drink? And I go, no. Then it was kind of like, okay, you're weird. But he said, okay, left. Came back up 5 minutes later, and he goes, hey man, do you want to watch the Cowboys-Eagles game with me later? What's Jesus trying to get me to do? Talk to him. Relate with him, share Jesus with him. I said yes. I'm a Cowboys fan, sadly, so I kind of was tempted to say yes. Oh, wow. That's the greatest, oh, okay. There's more booze now, okay. But I was tired. I had just got back from a trip. So I went back downstairs and I said, hey man, let me get your number. I'll text you, we'll hang out next week. Saturday rolls around. I had his phone number on a sticky note on my desk, and it was in my phone Saturday morning. I was about ready to text him. Oh man, I'm tired still. I didn't really get a break. I don't really want to do this. So I didn't. So I'll text him tomorrow morning, Sunday, we'll set something up. Sunday rolls around, same thing. I'm there. I love my freedom, my safety, my comfort. Awkward, taking this guy out. I'll text him tomorrow, and I'll set up a time with him, and we'll lock it in, and it'll be over, and I'll do it. About 6 hours later, I hear the worst scream I've ever heard in my entire life. It was so blood-curdling that it startled me, and I can still feel the goosebumps that I had in that moment. I walked outside, and this guy had lived with his girlfriend's parents. So he's living with his girlfriend who was living with her parents. And her mom had ran out of the apartment, and she was hysterical. Oh my gosh, and she was screaming. About a minute later, another girl walked out of the apartment, and she was bloodshot in the face, and she was jaw-dropped. 2 minutes later, the fire department and the ambulance rolls up. They go inside, they come out with nobody. And this young man who was 18 years old, and his girlfriend had both died that morning while I was about to text him on an overdose from fentanyl and heroin. I cannot tell you what that did to me. The point of my story is not for you to go, oh, shame on you. Oh, don't feel so bad about it. Forget that. The point of this is if you say no to Jesus when he's calling you to do something, there are consequences. There are results. Your proclivity to say yes or to say no to Jesus will determine if you waste your life or not. Can I give you a few things that you have to say no to if you're gonna follow Jesus? Number one, it's what I chose. You have to say no to comfort. Like I said earlier, Jesus was a savage. He wasn't like you and I. Now, if you're a pastor in here and someone comes up to you, you're an older Christian in here, and someone comes up to you and they say, I want to follow Jesus. If this happened to you on the street, you're going to be like, revival's happening. This is awakening. The fish are jumping in the nets these days. You'd be stoked. One time a man came up to Jesus and said that exact phrase, "I'll follow you." And you know what Jesus said back to him? "Foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." You still want to follow? Saying this, you might not even have a bed. You might not be promised a bed from Jesus. Now, for us Americans, that is so foreign, the idea of not having a bed. But did you know the guy that you claim to serve didn't even have a bed? He doesn't promise you comfort in this life. As a matter of fact, the introduction that most people got when they heard a message from Jesus. Now, I gotta pause here and say this. We in the West love crowds, especially us that preach. When there's a lot of people and they're excited and they're cheering, we're stoked. That's one of our favorite things. Jesus wasn't. As a matter of fact, when Jesus was in front of the crowds, he would get weary and he would say some of his most ridiculous lines because he wanted to test the people to see if they were there for him or they were there for a miracle. Or they were there because he was a good communicator. Or they were there just because there was hype. He tested them. And so he would say stuff like this: "Deny yourself." Pause there. That is so not American. You have never, almost never in your life been told, don't do what you feel to do. What are you most of the time told to do? You feel to do that? Go ahead. Whatever makes you happy. You feel that way? Go for it. Jesus' first command to you is what you feel and what makes you happy, probably don't do it. Deny yourself. Pick up your cross. You guys see that picture of the cross up there? That doesn't mean too much to us most of the time. When we think of the cross, yeah, we think of the instrument that Jesus died on, and we know that that is the access to salvation and to knowing him. But beyond that, we can't taste its reality. Can you imagine? You're that Taco Bell worker again. And some obscure religious man comes in. Once again, he claims to be God. And he looks at you and he says, "Deny yourself, pick up your electric chair, and follow me." How many of you following? We don't understand that that is the most brutal instrument that human beings have ever constructed to kill someone. Just so you know, humans, we're strange. We'll invent torture devices for people to keep them as alive as long as possible, in the most amount of pain as possible, and then eventually kill them. That's what Jesus died on. And do you know what they did with crosses? Crosses were like a sign on the side of the road. You ever seen a billboard? Of course you have. They got advertisements. What they would do with those is they would stick them outside of cities in the Roman Empire. And if you walked into the city, that was the first thing you'd see. Imagine going to Fresno tomorrow. That's the first thing you see out beside the city. People hanging there, dying. Exciting. The reason they did this is so that if you broke the law in their city, you would know this might be your consequence. This is a signpost. So when Jesus says the statement, "Pick up your cross," it is the same idea of me telling you to pick up your electric chair. It would make no sense to you if you're living for comfort. If you're living for money and for your safety and for your friends to like you and to think you're cool and all of those different things. Comfort and Christianity do not equate. It's one of the first things you have to say no to, comfort. Second thing is fear. How many of you have ever been fearful before? I remember one time I was in the Philippines. I was leading an outreach team there. We were preaching the gospel, and And on our off day, I went out into the ocean. And if you didn't know, Philippines has unbelievably beautiful oceans, crystal clear water. So I'm out there, I'm about 200 yards offshore. And I'm kind of diving down, kind of looking in the grass that's at the bottom. And all of a sudden, a 6-foot sea snake pops up right in front of my face. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but sea snakes are one of the most venomous snakes on the planet. And I'm just sitting there. And yeah, it's a snake, so I'm kind of like, oh, that's not good. Maybe I should swim away. But afterwards, I was like, oh, I could have died. Just been drowning. Just like, oh, there I am. Poison running through my body. A lot of you have felt fear before, natural fear. Fear of spiders or cliffs or whatever it is. For the Christian, most of the time, the fear we feel is shame when it comes to the name of Jesus. You ever felt that feeling? Have you ever had someone make fun of you for being a Christian? I remember, this is the most awkward moment of my life. I was preaching the gospel in another European city, and I was sharing the gospel with a guy, and the first thing I said to him was, hey man, do you know Jesus? And this was his response. It was like all of a sudden an evil villain from a movie came out. And I cannot tell you, I wanted to curl up into a ball and die. That feeling of shame. What does Paul say in Romans 1:16? I'm not ashamed of the gospel. A lot of us have shame when it comes to the gospel because Christianity to the world is not cool. Newsflash. And so when we get around people and we have to represent Jesus, this idea of fear pops up into our minds and our hearts, and it dominates us. And it causes us to live like cowards. Now, I used to be an Uber driver. I can't anymore. I got too many tickets. And one night, I picked up these people and they got in my car and they immediately started talking about all the partying, all the sex, all the drugs they were doing. And there was one girl in the car who was particularly promiscuous, and she paused everyone and she said this phrase that rattled me. Guys, at least I'm a Christian though, right? And my blood began to boil because there's this type of Christianity preached in America that says you can live like the devil and name the name of Jesus and everything is good. Newsflash, it's not. And so I had prepped the micro message in my head and I was ready to share, and they were about to get out of the car, and as they're getting out of the car, I tried to fire the words off my tongue and they stuck to my tongue. I turned off the Uber app and I drove back down the Pacific Coast Highway towards my house, and I was banging my hands on the steering wheel, saying, Derek, why is it that you're so prone to being a coward? Why is it that you like to be liked so much? Why is it that you care about your reputation so much? Now, I don't mean to be a hellfire and brimstone preacher, but there's this really intense verse in the book of Revelation. I have to share it with you. Revelation 21:8 talks about this place that the Bible describes as a lake of fire. I didn't write it. If you have a problem with it, go have a problem with it somewhere else. It says it in the book. And I just submit myself to the book. By the way, if you want a really good definition of a Christian, here's one. How many of you have ever read the Bible and you don't like something in it? Me. The difference between a Christian and a non-Christian is when they read something in the Bible that they don't like, the Christian bows the knee and says, you're God, I'm not. The non-Christian comes out with scissors and starts to cut it apart. So you know. Revelation 21:8 talks about this place, and it describes the type of people that go there. It says murderers and adulterers, and you go, oh yeah, those people go there. Do you know what the first thing it says? As for those that are cowardly. That shocked me. And at 2 a.m. on the Pacific Coast Highway, I determined that my name in the word coward would not show up in the same sentence when I stand before Jesus on that day. If your reputation is more important than the reputation of Jesus Christ in your life, then fear will always be your master. You will always be living for the approval of the person sitting next to you, your parents, your pastor, whoever it may be, if Jesus' reputation is not the most important thing to you. One of my favorite stories, I'm like a missionary to my core. I don't know if you know what that is, but a missionary is someone who essentially leaves their country, goes to another country, and starts to proclaim Jesus there. And I'm such a missionary that the first thing I ever asked my wife before even dating her was, are you willing to go to the Middle East and die there if God calls you to? And so I'm weird. But I love to read stories about missionaries. And there's this one missionary, his name is John Patton. And John Patton had a little bit of Gen Z, Gen Alpha in him. And so one day he was confronted with the lost in another nation. He decided he was going to leave his church and his ministry, and he was going to go to this nation. His elder of his church, the pastor of his church, heard about it and said, John, by the way, I forgot to mention this, the first 2 missionaries to go to this nation were immediately killed when they got there and eaten. Strange. I know, I'm strange. I like reading these stories. You don't have to like them, but just entertain me and listen. His elder, the pastor, heard about this and goes, John, you're going to be eaten by cannibals. John Patton had Jesus in him, savage. He looked at his elder and he said, Mr. Dixon, judging by your old age, I'm not advising you to tell that to your pastor, but Mr. Dixon, judging by your old age, you are soon to be laid in your grave there and be eaten by worms. Mr. Dixon, I care not whether I'm eaten by worms or by cannibals, so as long as I can serve my master in this nation. He goes there, and he sees no fruit. His wife dies, his kid dies, no one gets saved. He's there for 2 years. One night, the whole village of this certain city, island, had surrounded his hut, and they were there with sword and spear drawn, ready to kill him. In the morning, sun rises, they leave. John has no idea why. A year later, the whole island came to Christ. He asked the chief of the village, listen, this is the best part. He asked the chief of the village, you remember that night a year ago when you guys were trying to kill me? Why didn't you? The chief looked at him and goes, who were all those men in light and shining armor with swords drawn that looked like flame standing in and around your hut? Let me tell you this, if you can overcome fear, you will see your friends and the power of God on display in your life. Did you catch that? If fear holds you, you will never step out of the boat, Peter. And you will always live in your safety and your comfort, and your fear will be your friend. But if you can step out of the fear, let me tell you this, anytime I've ever gotten on stage, anytime I've ever talked to someone about Jesus, I always have this nervous, nauseous feeling in my guts. It's actually easier to speak to 30,000 people than it is to speak to you guys. You know why? Because I can see your faces. I can see some of you sleeping. I can see some of you bored. I can see some of you go like, why does this guy have curly hair? What's up with his mustaches? And I can see some of you engaged. And I can see your faces, and I can see some of you with that intense conviction, not knowing fully what to do with what I'm saying right now. But let me tell you this. If you determine to leave this place and you really want to follow Jesus, then fear cannot be a part of the equation. How do you overcome fear? I'm not sure totally yet. I've always felt it. I just know, step out, do it, Jesus meets you. Listen, courage is not the absence of fear. It's the ability to harness and grapple your fear, say, shut up, put it in your back pocket, and move forward. That's the essence of courage. Another thing you have to say no to is selfishness. Do you guys find it weird that we invented phones with front-facing cameras? Can I see your phone? I won't steal it, whoever's phone that is. Oh, she's quicker. Nice. She's an athlete. We invented phones with front-facing cameras. I know Gen Z, Gen Alpha doesn't do that anymore. You guys do this one. But front-facing cameras. Ladies, you're always like this. Guys, we're always the same. We're like this. And then you take that photo. This is weird. Now, I don't know if you know what a narcissist is, but a narcissist is essentially someone who's just about themselves all the time, and they even hide it, and it's just them. It's all the time, me. And back to the phones. We edit those photos to make them look better than they do. And then we post those photos for everybody to see, and then we tell people underneath our captions what we think about stuff. Don't you find that strange? If you were born in the 90s, which none of you were, most likely, if you were born in the 90s, your mom used to put photos on the fireplace mantle and on the coffee table. Can you imagine taking most people's photos that they have on their Instagram page and placing it inside of their house on the coffee table and on the mantle? How many photos would show up? Scroll right. It's another photo of you doing this. Scroll right. Another photo of you going. It's like, why is your whole cover page just you? Thank you very much. Do you guys find that strange? I do. I don't know if you would call that narcissism, but I mean, go debate that later with your friend. Either way, it's strange that we live in a society where everything is about you. Have you guys ever had one of those ads pop up on your Instagram or your TikTok where you were thinking about something and you're like, oh my gosh, I was thinking about those shoes and how'd the ad pop up? I didn't even say it out loud. Anybody have that happen? How many of you said something out loud and the next moment you're scrolling and it's all of a sudden it's like, they're listening. Mom, conspiracy theories are real, not conspiracies anymore. They're listening to us. All the ads, it's not a conspiracy, it's just these ad companies like to know what you like about you and they want to feed it to you. And they want to, and everything from social media, it's about you. Americans in 2017 spent $917 on Christmas Day alone. You might not think that's a lot of money, whatever. Remember what I said, 51% of the world lives on $2 a day, which means if 51% of the world worked every day for 1 year, they would make less money than we spend on 1 day of the year. Any form of Christianity where I am at the center is not Christianity at all. And you have to understand, I don't know what the speaker last night spoke about, mostly in regards to freedom, but let me tell you this about freedom. If you want to be free, get over you. This is fascinating. Ladies, you have been fed a steady diet since you were a young girl, that beauty looked a certain way. You saw it on social media, you saw it on Instagram, you saw it on TV or wherever you saw it, and you assumed that that's what beauty is. And you couldn't meet that standard. You didn't realize that there's makeup and they're editing girls to look a certain way. And so you didn't realize that. And so you just assumed you had to look that way. And you couldn't, so what naturally happens? You start to hate yourself. What's the remedy, according to the world, for self-hatred? Look in the mirror. You're beautiful. You're amazing. You're awesome. You're the coolest person ever. And you have these mantras where you're just supposed to tell yourself you're the best. Never works. As a matter of fact, psychologists have discovered that the more you think about yourself, the more depressed you get. They've done the studies. They load the same. If you saw it on a graph, the more you think about yourself, I don't know which, is this going in the right direction? Wrong direction? This way? Okay, this way. The more you think about yourself, the more depressed you get, the more you don't like yourself. The key to overcoming these things in our lives, stop thinking about yourself. Get consumed with what Jesus has for you. Get consumed with loving the person next to you and the people around you. And I can guarantee you, You won't feel that selfishness abiding in your life. Last couple of things here. The next thing you need to say no to is unbelief. Now, you might think of unbelief from the lens of being an atheist, but let me take you down another route. I had, my father-in-law passed away about 1.5 years ago. He was an amazing man. He was a pastor in Tacoma, Washington, and he went to a conference where a very famous preacher was speaking. This preacher, my father-in-law was sitting in the front row up here, kind of near where you are. The preacher got off the stage, and he started to shake people's hands after the message. You know, bless you, bless you, bless you, bless you. And he gets to my father-in-law, and he looked at him, and he goes, "You, sir, when was the last time you've done something preposterous with your life? Do you have a church salary?" "Yes." "You need to get rid of your church salary and do something preposterous with your life." Pastors in the room, imagine hearing that. He went to the donut table in the back to recover as you would from being wounded like that. And the preacher's assistant was at the donut table. Without hearing what the preacher had said to him, looked at him and goes, "You, sir, do you have a church salary? You need to get rid of your church salary and do something preposterous with your life." And my father-in-law began to weep. He went out into the parking lot and realized that his faith had become normal. He had stopped believing that God is the God of the Bible who still does those unbelievable and miraculous things. And he had realized that he had become unbelieving towards what the Lord could do through him. So guess what he did? He went back home, he got rid of his church, gave it to another pastor, got rid of his salary, sold his house, and on $1,000 of monthly support became a missionary with a sick wife and 4 kids. Now, you're too young because you don't know about budgeting yet, but that means you're homeless. $1,000, sick wife, 4 kids, that's what, you're homeless. And God took him on this journey where he started our ministry and he empowered people like me, and now I'm standing before you. You have no idea that the reason I'm standing on this stage goes back to a man 15 years ago leaving unbelief and entering into the promises of God over your life. Did you know God has promises over your life? Yes. Did you know that there are dreams that he has that are far more than your American dream? There's a story in the Old Testament. Joshua and Caleb go into the promised land as spies with 10 other guys. The 10 guys come out and they say to Moses, "We can't conquer this land. There's giants in there." Joshua and Caleb go to Moses and they say, "Those giants, Moses, are our breakfast." Unbelief bows its knee to obstacles. Faith bows its knee to promises. Hear me. Many of you in your life think that there are obstacles in your way. I can't talk. Too young. I don't have a good family. I wish I was closer with my dad. I wish I had this. I wish I could do that. And there's all these obstacles, and you bow your knee to the obstacle, and you don't realize God has something so much higher for you. Maybe he's calling you to preach at your school. Maybe he's calling you one day in the future to move to another nation. I was talking with my friend Cannon. Where are you, bro? Are you somewhere in here still? Okay, he's back there. He's a freaking Hulk of a man. Look at him. I was talking to him up here before this and just asking him questions about what he was doing. And how many of you have seen that movie, Sound of Freedom? Okay, if you go, I don't know if you're allowed to see it. I don't know all the details, but ask your parents, go see it. It's about this guy who rescues women and children out of human trafficking and human sexual exploitation. And Cannon was like, "Man, I was inspired by that movie. That's what I want to do with my life. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I'd like to beat up people that do that type of stuff and then represent Jesus while doing it." And I was like, that is so much better than I would like to get a 9-to-5 job and maybe one day, I'll go to church on Sundays, I can give Jesus my Sundays, but I just can't wait to watch college football on Saturdays. I can't wait to go to my school. I can't wait to do this. I can't wait to do that. No. God has a dream for your life, and it is far bigger than you're imagining. Bow your knee to that, not to the obstacles in your life, not to the excuses that you have. Lastly, when you say yes on your wedding day to your spouse, not only are you saying yes to them, not only are you saying no to everybody else, but your yes is your deepest expression of your love. It is the ultimate reality that you would give yourself to one person. When you say yes to Jesus fully, it is your deepest expression of love to him. Love is not a feeling in a worship service. You know that feeling? Like, I love worship. I love Jesus. And then you leave, the feeling leaves, and you're like, I don't know if I love Jesus. Love is not so much about a feeling as it is about your response to him, your yes to him. Listen to me very carefully on this. If you catch one thing tonight, catch this. John chapter 13, Jesus is about to go to his death. Now, if you had a group of people that you were with and you were about to die for them, what is the last thing you'd say? You know what Jesus did? Before even saying anything, he got a towel, he wrapped it around his waist, he got his hands and his knees, and he started to wash their feet. He comes to Peter, and Peter says no. If God came into the room right now and said, I want to wash your feet, how many of you would say no? 100%. I'm with Peter. No way you're washing my feet. Not a shot. You're God. I'm supposed to be washing you, doing something for you. I got to do something for you. Before you can follow Jesus, you have to understand that Jesus has to meet you. The only way you're ever going to leave this place and actually do something for Jesus, if you understand he wants to meet you. He wants to encounter you. If LeBron James walked into this room right now, how many of you would tell your friends? Now imagine if LeBron James walked into this room right now and he pointed at you and said, hey, I'd like to go play basketball with you out in the court out there. How many of you would be excited? How many of you would say yes? After that, imagine LeBron James. Can we bring it down just a little bit? Just a little bit, bring it down. LeBron James says, I'd like to take you to dinner as well. Come out. You guys going? How many of you, when you're 85 years old and you can barely speak and you got dentures, would still be telling people about that one youth camp where the second greatest basketball player of all time took you out to dinner? Michael Jordan's the best basketball player of all time, okay? Okay. How many of you would be telling your kids, ladies, if Justin Bieber took you out to dinner? How many of you telling your kids, oh my gosh, of course? Do you see how this works? Listen to me. Engage. Back up here. Listen, 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 listen. If you encounter someone great, you tell other people about it. If you encounter Jesus in this 5 days, the proof that you encountered him will be you tell people about it when you leave this place. So the disciples encounter Jesus, they have their feet washed, and then Jesus says the simple phrase, love one another as I have loved you. Simple phrase. How did Jesus love you? How did he love you? He went to the cross for you. Love one another's just as I have loved you. How should your love look? Side hug. Love you. You're awesome. How should your love look? As radical as that cross looks to you is how radical your life should look to the world. Invite the worship team back up. How many of you read the Bible? Some of you are raising your hand right now and I've read the Bible one time. Shout out to you, bro. There's a book in the Bible called the Book of Acts. How many of you know what that book is? In 2 chapters, listen, in 2 chapters, there's a statement where the author says that the Christians of that day were selling houses for one another. None of you even flinched at that. Can you imagine if you went home and your parents were like, hey, we sold our house and we gave all the money away. You don't have a bed anymore. Hooray. When you're like, oh. Can you imagine you're 18 in here? You go back to your church and you go, man, this crazy guy with a mustache told me I needed to be a missionary somewhere and share the gospel. And I thought that was a cool idea. The only problem is I don't have any money. So you get the microphone out of the pastor's hand and you said, hey, I need money to go. And before you can finish your offering sermon, someone in the back stands up and says, I'll sell my house for you. That's what cross-like love looks like. Imagine if cross-like love met your high school through your life. Imagine if cross-like love met your future university through your life. There's a yes tonight you have to give. And it's not a yes, Jesus, I surrender to you. I love you. I want salvation. It's a surrender so that your life looks like the cross when you leave this place. People scratch their head at you and go, you're different. What happened to you? Come to summer camp 2024. Shout out if you want to find out. Can you guys stand with me this last moment? Guys, men in the room, look at me. Men, I'm calling you men for a reason, not boys. Men, look at me. Some of you in this room don't have dads that tell you that your life is significant and there's greatness on your name. I'm here to tell you tonight that Jesus has something more significant for you than going to parties at university and sleeping with as many women as possible. Women in the room, I'm here to tell you that silence is not your portion and that you were not meant to be silent on the sidelines while men did everything. You were meant, just like Deborah in the Bible, Mary in the Bible, and many others, to use your voice, to use your hands. If you want to surrender and give Jesus a real yes, saying, Jesus, I want to follow you in my high school, in front of other people, with my voice, with my hands, with my feet. I just want you to raise both hands. I want you to pray this with me. Jesus, Jesus, I say yes to you. I say no to comfort, to fear, to unbelief, to selfishness. In Jesus' name. I'm gonna ask you to do something crazy. I want you to turn to your neighbor. And we're gonna have a practice for what you're gonna do when you go back to your high schools in the fall. Okay, I just want you to imagine it. Up here, up here, up here. Up here, you're in your math class. You remember Mustache Man's message. You remember his message, and you go, okay, I gotta talk to people about Jesus. I can't live in comfort. You're in math, you look to the nerd next to you. You're like, that guy's a nerd, but I know Jesus is calling me to talk to him right now. You turn to him, and this is what you're gonna do. You're gonna practice with your friend right now. I want you to share a 1-minute version of your testimony, what Jesus has done in your life, and why you follow him. Can you do that? On the count of 3, we're gonna go. 1, 2, 3, one partner, go. Once you're done, switch. Once you're done, switch. Okay, pause. Back up here. I'm gonna pray for you guys before we finish. I'm gonna ask the Lord to make this word tonight stuck in your mind and your heart when you leave. So that you do have a radical sense when you leave that your life isn't normal and that you're not gonna waste it and you're gonna live for something different and extreme in the eyes of the world. Jesus, we pray. Lord, we hate as Christians coming into gatherings and leaving the same. Not this week, Lord. Not this week. Don't let us leave the same. Don't let us have a church camp high. Lord, we want to be different. Mark us. Mark the young people in this room to live differently, not just for the next year or the next 5 years, but the next 60 years of their life. They would carry a sense of who you really are, and they would be dedicated to it. In Jesus' name. We're gonna jump back into worship, but I just want you to meditate and think in your minds as you sing. Lord, I got friends, I got people around me, and I surrender to you, and I wanna give everything to you for your name and to shout Jesus to the world. Amen? Amen.